The 20th National Congress of the Communist Party of China is a meeting of great importance. It takes place at a critical time as the entire party and the Chinese people of all ethnic groups embark on a new journey to build China into a modern socialist country in all respects and advance toward the second centenary goal. To anything that can be built in a factory tends to have a learning curve. Anything that is built on site tends not to have a learning curve or to have a very shallow learning curve. What I've realized is that Chinese people live in Russian-style apartment blocks, like tower blocks, and shop at American-style malls, which they get to with a combination of American-style highways and Russian-style trains. I talk to every tech CEO and every founder and every top VC, whatever. They're like, the place I love to go best is Tokyo, and they'll do business in Tokyo just as an excuse to go to Japan.
Hi, welcome. This is the From the New World podcast. Today I'm speaking with Noah Smith, his second time on the show. We discuss bubbles in China, nuclear versus solar, the anthropic fallacy, or why anthropic is making the same mistakes as the horseless carriage fallacy, and what Palmer Luckey being a weeb means for Japanese economic development. All fun topics. If you like the episode, the best thing you can do is to let a friend know, either in person or online. That's always the best way to help us. And if you're in the DC area, we have a great meetup for the From the New World podcast and Substack this coming Saturday. So that'll be Saturday, October 12th, and it'll be in the DC area. You can find the details below, and I'd be happy to see any of you sign up there. Without further ado, here's Noah Smith. What is the weeb economy?
Well, the weeb economy is a term that I invented in order to teach Japanese people the word weeb, because pretty much if you go around asking Japanese people what's a weeb, people are like, weeb. And then like nobody knows what the fuck it is. But I wanted to teach Japanese people that word. And I also had an important economic point to make, which is that Japan needs foreign direct investment. In the 20th century, most countries that were sort of developing or sort of like already somewhat developed but catching up, like Japan was, were they really eschewed the idea of foreign direct investment. They really said, okay, look, if we let all the American businesses come in here and set up shop, they're going to outcompete our local businesses. We're never going to build our own domestic brands. They're not going to like import their best technologies. We're just going to be like this sort of cheap production base for them forever. And we're not going to grow. We're not going to get rich, right? We need to grow our own companies, our own brands. We need to compete. And so we need to protect our economy from FDI. That was a common idea. This is the idea of import substitution, or it's part of the idea of import substitution and infant industry ideas. And so basically, that's why people tried to protect themselves from FDI. And this idea persisted right up until, I would say, until the 90s at least. And it was a common idea. And a lot of the people who hailed, Japan and then Korea for developing, hailed them for resisting FDI. So Korea took a little bit more FDI than Japan, but mostly not. Mostly they focused on building up their own domestic brands and exporting, et cetera, et cetera. So the idea is FDI sucks. But then along came the internet, which made it possible to use FDI for a second purpose, which is FDI as a production base. So instead of me, multinational company, whoever, like let's say Apple, right? Instead of me building Apple, putting Apple branch offices in your country so I can sell you Apple stuff. Instead of that, I'm putting Apple branch offices, I'm putting Apple factories in your country so I can build stuff to sell back into my own country, so I can take advantage of your labor or your cheap capital or your high technology or whatever, supply chains or whatever you have that I want to take advantage of. I use you as a production base. And China was one of the countries that really, powered ahead with this idea. But it was actually, FDI was very important for China, but it was even more important for Poland and Malaysia, whose economies are very,
recent economic success stories.
And they're both richer than China. They're essentially developed countries now, I'd say.
Really? Malaysia as a developed country now, that's not a take I hear often.
No, but
you know more about this than I do.
Pardon?
But you know more about this than I do,
Right. Like you go to Kuala Lumpur, it looks like, Kuala Lumpur looks nicer than an American city. People have decent sized houses. It's not Singapore, right? People are like people compare Malaysia to Singapore. It's not as rich as Singapore, but it is pretty rich. Let's check out where they are. Um, Malaysia is at $28,000 of per capita GDP.
That's not terrible.
I mean, that's not terrible at all. It's a lot. It's a lot higher than China, which that's in 2022. China is at 18,000. So Malaysia 28,000 to China's 18,000. Well, that's not bad. They're better than China, and Poland has really pulled away recently. Poland is at 37.7 thousand. So Poland has a better claim to be a developed country than Malaysia. It's true, but Malaysia is doing pretty well. Let's see how they're doing relative to Mexico. I don't remember how much Mexico's at. Oh, Malaysia has passed up Mexico. So Mexico's now at about 20,000. Malaysia is like at 28,000. So Malaysia is richer than Mexico. Um, and
But this was all due to foreign DPI.
Yeah, I mean, of course, Malaysia has some natural resource industry too. But
Or
FDI,
mostly, yeah.
basically, if you're going to do like chip packaging and testing, and you want to set that up in a place where you have it's cheap, but also and the government will support you, and you'll have like all the engineers and line engineers and technicians and like educated people you need to do that. Where do you go? You go to Malaysia.
Interesting.
Um,
Okay.
and so that's they do all that. So what's interesting is that in How Asia Works, Joe Studwell really bashed Malaysia for the failure of the car industry. He expected them to be like South Korea, but instead they used FDI in the electronics industry, and they really just zoomed ahead. Penang is sort of the center of the Malaysian electronic industry. It's near Kuala Lumpur, and Bayan Lepas is the name of the giant industrial park where so Malaysia exports in terms of electronics. Malaysia exports far more per person of electronics than say the United States does, or than Japan does. Like Malaysia, just electronics exports are their stock and trade, and
Gotcha.
they do natural resource shit too. They'll make you some rubber or whatever, but like they'll dig you up a little bit of gas, oil, I guess. But like really, it's electronics exports that have really made Malaysia great.
Yeah, it feels like for Japan specifically, it feels like it has this unique brand. That's why the title really stuck out to me, right? And you talk about this in your episode with Noah, or sorry, with Eric, where yeah, there's a lot of foreigners, very wealthy foreigners, maybe most famous among them Palmer Luckey, who just love Japan, and I'd count myself among that. There really is a
Right.
possibility of a weeb economy, if they're willing to, encourage that foreign investment.
Right. Well, Palmer, Anduril is great at research, but they haven't so far been able to scale up. They're trying with a new factory to scale up in terms of
And where is that factory?
let's see. Oh, well, they have a factory in Mississippi. They have a Rhode Island one. They have one in Australia. So they've done some FDI. They have one in Australia. And Anduril is going to realize that you can make drones in Japan. And they haven't realized that yet, but they're going to. Maybe they'll see this podcast. Let's call Palmer up and tell him to make a factory in Japan. But the fact that Palmer's a weeb makes this more likely. What I'm trying to tell Japan is that their international appeal as a place to live and as a culture that people enjoy will also help them add FDI, because now the Japanese government actually wants FDI. They've changed. They realized that FDI was a powerful, force multiplier for China, for Poland, for Malaysia, and for Taiwan to some degree, less so, but to some degree. And so Japan, they've been courting FDI, and they've landed a really huge piece of FDI in the form of fabs. So TSMC is building a couple fabs in Kumamoto, and then Micron is building some fabs, I think in Yokohama, I don't remember. Samsung is building a fab in Japan. When did you think you'd see South Korean companies building factories in Japan? Like,
Yeah, that's crazy. Like Samsung, these were supposed to be the national champions, of South Korea, and now they're building elsewhere. Why is that? Why are they
and
building in Japan?
And so they are, because Japan has cheap costs, cheaper than Korea. Japan has a lot of upstream stuff like Japan makes a lot of semiconductor tools and materials. They make like the best photoresist and some really good nanolithography stuff, and they and various other things, testing equipment. I don't know, whatever. They make really good upstream things, and then they make and then they just have all these basic the failure of the Japanese semiconductor industry means you have all these well-trained like 50-year-old engineers sitting around who know how to do semiconductors really well, but who have no one to employ them. Well, guess what? You can
That's
go employ them.
crazy. Yeah.
And so this is really great for them. That's one piece. You're also starting to see some nascent investment in AI in Japan, which is really interesting. People have heard about Sakana, the AI research thing. My favorite example is actually Spellbrush. Do you know those guys?
Not personally, no.
Okay, so look up Spellbrush. They have a tool called Niji Journey. They're the only company I think that partners with Midjourney. So they have a revenue sharing agreement or profit sharing agreement or something like that with Midjourney. And when you go into Midjourney, you can use the main engine to make picture like photorealistic pictures, or you can use Niji Journey to make anime. And Niji Journey is made by Spellbrush, who has their office across the hall from Midjourney, and I think got Midjourney's CEO to manually install their GPU cluster in their office, which is quite a feat. And so, but anyway, Spellbrush is really cool. They're the weebiest people you ever saw. They each have like their figurines of their chosen waifu on their desk. They have anime posters everywhere and figurines and stuff. And when I went to interview them, they spent quite some time explaining to me what the isekai genre is, which I didn't even know. Like,
Really? Oh yeah, I remember. We were talking. So this was recent, right? Because we were talking recently, and you were talking about how you weren't really familiar with Isekai.
yeah, that's right. I haven't really like I've seen some of these, advertisements for some of these shows that seem completely based on Dungeons and Dragons, and I'm like,
Yeah. Do
Japanese
they
people
like
don't play
Farron?
Dungeons and Dragons. They might play like online, like MMOs based on loose land Dungeons and Dragons, but like it's like I was reincarnated as a slime and now I wander the dungeon or something like that, right? Like they're all D&D based. I'm like, what? You're like anime just became about D&D?
Many such cases, yeah.
Many such cases. I'm like, well, on one hand, I do like D&D and I do like anime, but that's a little bit like eating ice cream on pizza. I'm not
Well,
sure
a
how
lot
that.
of people, a lot of people like Isekai. I mean, I'm not sure how many people like eating ice cream on pizza, but I'm sure we can find someone.
Oh, it's true.
Let's
It's
ask
like
Palmer what he thinks about ice cream on pizza.
those fucking Zoomers. Anyway, you're right.
I love
Um,
those.
yeah. So like, I guess the point of the Weeb economy is that Japan is the new France. In other words, in previous centuries, people thought if it's French, it's high class. You could give your restaurant or your boutique a French name, and people would pay more for it. And now I think you can do that with Japan. So, have you ever heard of Niku Steakhouse in San Francisco?
No.
So, Niku Steakhouse, which means meat in Japanese, for those who don't know, Niku Steakhouse is not Japanese. It's not owned by Japanese people. It doesn't really cook anything in a Japanese way. It has American Wagyu on the menu, but so does everybody. You it has a Japanese name, and you go there and it has a few like random little like pieces of bamboo or little like Japanese style things to make it seem like it's Japanese, even though it's not at all. It's just a traditional American steakhouse. But the point is that now you get style points for pretending to be Japanese the way you used to get style points for pretending to be French. And Tokyo is the new Paris. In the past, people would, dream of like sipping a little coffee on the French Riviera um, or just like, you know, walking down the whatever that big street is. What's that street called? With like the Arc de Triomphe and all that shit.
No
The big
clue.
street in Paris.
Too young
Anyway,
for this.
you know what I'm talking about. But the point is that like then and you'd also like you'd have the like romantic fantasies of you know meeting your lover in Paris or whatever. And it wouldn't necessarily be a French person. It might be someone from someone else, but France would be like the backdrop at which point you would meet each other. And now we have, starting with Lost in Translation, we have this same romantic fantasy for Japan, right? It's like you have this idea of just like Tokyo being this romantic city, sitting in these beautiful little cafes or whatever, or beautiful
The
little
24
restaurants.
hour night cafe.
Yeah, night cafe. Yeah, I love those. And then and I'd say the fantasy hasn't quite crystallized into as much of a trope cliche as it has for France. But you're starting to see. So in Paris after World War One, you saw the so-called Lost Generation, which included Ernest Hemingway and included a bunch of artsy hipsters who would basically go to Paris and hang out, and that includes the ultimate diss of expats. Do you want to hear this? I think you want to hear
Let's
this.
hear it. Yeah.
These were mostly American expats, some British expats too, but it's from The Sun Also Rises. Have you seen? You know that book, The Sun Also Rises?
Yeah, I've read the book.
This guy's talking to his friend, and he's like, "You're an expatriate. You've lost touch with the soil. You get precious. Fake European standards have ruined you. You drink yourself to death. You become obsessed with sex. You spend all your time talking, not working. You're an expatriate. See, you hang around cafes." Just massive beatdown of all expatriates, but it's he's making fun of himself, obviously. And so uh,
And those were Parisians in the day. Now you go to
now
Tokyo.
you go to Tokyo. Moot went to Tokyo. PewDiePie went to Tokyo. Palmer Luckey will hang around in Tokyo. Like, I talk to every tech CEO and every founder and every top VC, whatever. They're like, the place I love to go best is Tokyo, and they'll do business in Tokyo just as an excuse to go to Japan. Tokyo is the new Paris.
And that's the Weeb economy.
That's the Weeb economy, and by and large, Japanese people, both regular people and in the government and business, they do not understand, they do not realize the power of this appeal.
Why is it that Japan used to be basically a developed country and now has this opportunity to use these techniques that are maybe more associated with developing countries?
Well, Japan, I mean, they have been economically stagnating for a while. When I say a while, I mean since 2007. People think that Japan's stagnation began in 1990 when their bubble burst. That is by and large wrong. People call the 90s a lost decade, but in fact, Japan grew during the 90s. And if you look at
And does that include productivity growth?
that, includes productivity growth. Yeah. Now, I will say that total factor productivity statistics are pretty janky, and I don't quite trust them. I think they are. I think TFP statistics are contaminated by the financial effects of the real estate market. People are. I think structures are dominating what they think of as productive capital, and that when you have that, basically how much people are willing to pay for housing, we could say the implicit discount rate on housing is contaminating how much people think capital is worth. So I think that people think that you've bought a lot of capital when you haven't. You just had a housing bubble.
Yeah,
I think TFP statistics are contaminated by that and by some other things. Um, but I think that TFP statistics basically they fail to account for labor productivity in Japan. So I would look at labor productivity. And what we find is that labor productivity continued to grow in Japan through 2007. In the 2000s, Japan recovered because they finally bailed out the banks. So the reason the growth in the 90s was actually slow, it wasn't zero, but it was slow. The reason growth was slow is because of a financial overhang. They didn't, the banks had bad debts, and companies, there were all these zombie companies, and that banks just basically sort of evergreened their loans, gave them cheap loans and loans and loans just to keep going, often at the behest of the government. And this sucked up capital and talent and whatever from new growing companies. So you couldn't really start a company in Japan because everyone wanted to work for these shitty companies that were being sustained on life support by cheap loans, right? And then good companies couldn't get a loan because the banks were giving all their money to these zombie companies. And that was basically the 90s. And finally, in the early 2000s, Koizumi came in and he's like, no, fuck this. We're going to just clean up the bad debts off the big banks' balance sheets, and then let some companies fail and merge. And then you had a big wave of like downsizing, layoffs. Risutora. Can you guess what that is? Risutora.
no. So I speak literally zero Japanese.
Risutora kushuringu. Restructuring is the Japanese name
I
for
see. Yeah.
Risutora is the name for layoffs. And this came into the lexicon in the 2000s. But then if you look in the 2000s, from 2000 through 2007, Japan outgrows both Europe and the United States in per capita terms. Cool, right? Nobody knows that. Multiple lost decades, say the foreign press who doesn't know what the fuck they're talking about because they look at aggregate statistics instead of per capita. But you look at per capita in Japan in the 2000s, 2000 through 2007, for like 8 years, they were outgrowing us. They came back to economic health. Then the Great Recession hit. What happened? Why did the Great Recession and then Japan's labor productivity was growing in the 2000s, and then as soon as the Great Recession hits, Japan's labor productivity goes to zero. Their productivity doesn't go to zero. Their growth goes to zero. Their productivity flatlines, and it has remained flat since then. what the fuck? We don't exactly know. So I don't actually belabor this in the book draft that I just turned in. Oh, by the way, for people who don't realize this, is because I'm writing this in a book for Japan about Japan called Weeb Economy. Maybe we should have introduced that at the beginning, but that's what's really going on. I'm writing this book, and so basically, uh, what happened? So we don't really know what happened. There was the financial crisis. And so there are these theories about what the financial crisis made the yen too expensive, and this made Japan lose market share to Chinese and Korean competitors in export industries. There's that idea. There's rapid aging, which had been biting for a while, but really started to bite around then. There's the earthquake in 2011. There's China sort of climbing up the value chain, beginning to compete directly with Japan. There's a bunch of other stuff. There's the baby boomers starting to retire, and they were this large productive generation. There's many things that could have caused this, but the fact of the matter is Japan's productivity flatlined since 2008. And that was in the 2000s, Japan was still the future. And I think people don't remember this. Certainly, you're too young to remember this. Sonny boy, you're too young to remember. But back in my day,
Japan was growing.
Japan was growing. You know, they were the future, man. Um, we should do an entire 2-hour podcast in just a Texan accent.
We can
I
try.
am from Texas. I can do a Texas accent. So they Japan in the 2000s, let's see, the digital camera explosion. Japan got digital cameras before anyone else. They basically invented digital SLRs and the censored things and whatever. Basically they invented still cameras that could take like IMAX quality movies. And that was in the 2000s. They were selling those. 3G. Remember 3G? Are you old enough to remember 3G? When that
Yeah,
was a thing?
barely.
Japan dominated 3G. Japan had camera phones and texting and all these things the American phones were late to get. They dominated cell phones in the 2000s before
So
the
what
iPhone.
happened?
Well, I mean, the iPhone came out, but then also it's not clear. Like basically, their electronic companies were very, very shitty in the era of 4G and whatever. And I don't entirely know that story. Samsung was better, but honestly, like Apple just kicked everyone's ass in that market. Japan, like a lot of these new appliances that we take for granted, were invented by Japan in like the 90s and 2000s. Like your Zojirushi rice cooker that you love, and like all these things. Like Japan came out, like these were new appliances Japanese people were getting. HD TVs in the year 2001, in the year of our Lord 2001, everyone had a cathode ray tube television. Nobody had an LCD, LED, or plasma TV. Right now, we all have LED TVs, but then there was this age of LCD and plasma, and then those were just about as good. Honestly, LED TVs are like 10% better, but flat panel TVs, that was invented in Japan. They came out with that. They popularized that. Later, Japan lost those markets because they were the best in LCD TVs, and then they lost to LED TVs because Samsung sort of took that over, and then it became commoditized, etc. But the point is that in the 2000s, that was new, modern, amazing, new Japanese technology. Hybrid cars, the Prius, the gas mileage that blew everyone else away. This totally, like, the Prius looked so fucking futuristic in 2003 or 4. Like, it was this little bubble car that could go for 50 miles a gallon and just like had this amazing acceleration that like just used a battery. Like, that was so cool. Like, that was Japan. And so I could go on, but there's or Blu-ray DVDs, just all these things. What were some other examples? I mean, like video game consoles, obviously still
Oh yeah, like
still the leader,
Nintendo's still big, still huge today.
still huge today. Some of these things are still huge today. And then at the same time, Japan was quietly building up strength in these component making industries, like Nitto Denko. It's like Nitto Denko will make you like very fancy chemical shit that goes into your electronics that I don't even know because I'm not an electrical engineer. But it's like, oh yeah, and then we get this one film and it's only made by Nitto Denko, and that we need that to make all our stuff. Like, so they got these super high value component industries, and Japan was still very tops in machine tools and shipbuilding in the 2000s. So basically, Japan was kicking ass in the 2000s, and people don't even realize it because rapid aging and shrinking of the population covered it up at the aggregate level. And, that meant that the Japanese total economy was not growing in size at the speed it had been, but it was growing in wealth, and it was still at the technological forefront. And it was still slightly catching up with America and Europe. Um,
Right.
and then it fell
Well,
behind after that.
yeah. Do we know why Japan was so ahead in terms of those kind of niche chemicals and new products and so on? There's often a tension. Um, Usually, this is discussed as between Europe and North America,
Uh-huh.
but I feel like China's closer to, or East Asia in general is closer to the American side than to the European side. But Europe, there's really a culture of kind of craftsmanship and creating things by hand, and these sort of German engineering, right? Whereas in the West, it feels like there's more of a culture of scale and a culture of kind of um, you know uh, high automation, if that makes sense. Is how does that relate to like why we have so many, or why there were so many Japanese leads in like electronics, so on?
All right. So essentially, there's two big theories, and they're both correct. And the proponents of them hate each other and think that only their theory is correct. The first theory is that Japanese industrial policy forced forced Japanese companies. So Japan always had a very strong business culture, very strong corporations from the Meiji period. But so then they came out of World War II with these companies that were sort of, the big conglomerates had been broken up, but companies were still basically intact, the corporate sector. And so then the bureaucracy, METI, the industrial policy bureaucracy, which was really the main institutions that the Americans left intact, but it reformed itself in a way. This is all in Chalmers Johnson's famous book, of course. They um, they guided. They said to these companies, "Look, companies, you're going to build heavy industries and chemical industries, right? You're going to build things with big metal bashing things with fancy metallurgy, like with engines and shit. And you're going to build big vats of chemicals where you make really, really well made, pure, you know, efficiently synthesized chemicals. And that's what you're going to do. And if you don't do that, we won't let you have any foreign exchange we will not allocate you any dollars, right? So you can't buy imports. So unless you do these things that we want, we won't give you the foreign exchange. So do it. And they were like, okay. And so like they did it, and they became very, very good at this. They poured all their resources into this. The other theory, which also happened, was that a whole bunch of enterprising Japanese entrepreneurs, some of which were people who started their own company after World War II, some of the people were people working in a division of a company that existed before World War II, so people who started after World War II were like, Sony and Honda and like a few others, but then people who like companies that existed from like the 20s or something, there was like, I don't know, Casio, Seiko, a lot of these companies. But then they had entrepreneurs who started, divisions that ended up taking over the whole company, right? So like Seiko became a real powerhouse in like LCDs. And before, they were really just good at making like little finely tuned watches like the Swiss, right? They were competing with Switzerland making mechanical watches.
Yeah, so I own a Seiko watch. So yeah,
Is it a digital watch or is it an analog watch?
analog, I think.
Yeah. So that's a classic product. Like that, those analog watches are made by hand. Those are made by a little gnome, in Switzerland tinkering thing, or in Japan. Like it was like a gnome off between Japan and Switzerland, and they were about.
So there's a bit of that like European style tinkering culture too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, I mean Japan. I would say Japan and Europe have pretty similar traditional manufacturing cultures.
Oh,
Very similar.
interesting. Okay.
Germany and Japan a little bit different. Uh, Really not that different, honestly. Like German engineering was more about getting extremely high performance, low batch things. But there's some of that in Japan too. I mean, you can think of a samurai sword as that. No, but there's some cases of Japanese engineering that are like that, and they're. But I think Japan got more famous for less for the very high end performance things and for extremely high performance factories, incredibly efficient production techniques to create like ultra fine chemicals, things like that. Although the German chemical industry is just as good, but I would say that, yeah. So there's a similar, between like engineering culture between Japan, Germany, Switzerland, North Italy, Finland. Finland got it later, I guess. But then a lot of other places. Some places like some traditional manufacturing, like the Netherlands, basically like Central Europe type of stuff, had this traditional manufacturing culture that was very, very quality focused, and that was similar. Um, but it took a lot more than that because you have to be at the technological forefront of things. Japan after World War II had so I talked about the entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs, but what do? They went and got technology from America. So Bell Labs, RCA, and a couple other corporate labs, Westinghouse, were doing all this research in the years after World War II. Big science had become the order of the day. And they discovered so much shit. Everything from the transistor to like the LCD to an LED, any modern electronics thing you can name, and just all other kinds of stuff too. Of course, there's this great book called We Were Burning by Bob Johnstone. And it's about Japanese entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs, most of whom got technology from America. And so it's interesting. Japan did not steal any of this technology. We think of like China stealing technology. They absolutely do. Uh, Japan did not refuse to pay royalties. They paid the royalties. They licensed this stuff. RCA, especially the TV company, America's TV company sucked. The research division and the product division didn't talk to each other. So
Of the American company.
yes, the American
What the
company had
hell?
a lab that invented all this awesome shit, and the product people wouldn't put it in the products. So what did the lab do? They sold it all to Japan. They're like, well, we got to make money. Let's license this all to some random Japanese guys, and then built it into a better product that outcompeted RCA's product division. RCA died because the product division wouldn't actually incorporate the innovations from the lab.
And do we know why? Like why they didn't
Nope.
incorporate the new innovations?
I don't know why.
Like,
It's probably innovators' dilemma. It's just Clay Christensen, right? That's the likeliest explanation. Because the America's economy after World War II was huge, gigantic domestic market. And this is a classic Clay Christensen trap, right? You have this giant domestic market and you have all these existing customers for your just like, traditional boob tube TVs. So if you're the RCA salesman, that's a huge market. Why are you going to focus on some small market for some newfangled thing that your own lab cooked up? But then everyone had to have a lab because it was prestigious, right? Because government was throwing a bunch of
I
money at
see.
labs.
Yeah.
After World War
Okay.
II, you're supposed to have a big lab. So Bell was a little different. Bell was prevented from incorporating a lot of these things by anti-monopoly stuff. They were afraid that if Bell actually adapted the transistor to products, they become even more dominant. So the antitrust movement stopped Bell from adapting most of the stuff. But that was fine. It turned out to be fine because then the people left to form Shockley Semiconductor with the famous asshole Shockley, who everyone hated. And then everyone immediately quit his stupid company because they hated him. And they formed Fairchild. And Fairchild was badly managed. So people quit that and formed Intel, and Intel succeeded.
Nice.
And so
All's well that ends well.
yeah, but do you know that the microprocessor was invented by a Japanese guy?
No, no.
Yeah, for Intel, and that guy had gotten I forget exactly what was the product that he got uh, from an American company. He got something. It might have been like the LCD that he got. I don't remember what it was that he got from an American company and then licensed it. And the Japanese company actually built it into products that work. So then he pretty much repaid the exact same thing with a microprocessor. So there was this tremendous traffic between American and Japanese scientists and engineers. And sometimes this was to the great benefit of the Americans. So, for example, Hewlett Packard um, actually used printer technology developed in Japan. They developed some, and Japanese companies used some of their stuff, but they had deals with Japan. Some of they got printer technology from Japan and built it into huge business, right? Japan got LCD technology from America, built it into huge business. So you had these two-way transfers of technology. A lot of the semiconductor stuff that we perfected or advanced a lot, we not perfected obviously, but advanced a lot, came from Japan. And so once Japanese companies got really big, they started getting the Clay Christensen trap, right? They started getting the innovator's dilemma. Um, they, Japanese companies would invent cool new things and then fail. Japanese companies, I believe, invented OLED TVs, but yet they just
Didn't
lost that market.
commercialize.
Right, because they were so focused on their traditional business of LCD TVs that they didn't want to disrupt it with the OLED TVs. And so, because at the beginning, OLED was very expensive, it was a high-end thing, it was a niche market, right? Classic Christensen dilemma. And Samsung is like, okay, we'll take that. And then eventually OLED TVs got cheap enough where you could outcompete all the LCDs. And then goodbye Japanese TV makers. Goodbye Sharp. Sharp is a beast in its day. And so you really have innovator's dilemma issues, I think. I really think it's Clay Christensen at the end of the day.
Right. So when you have these innovators dilemma issues, is there something about being in a foreign market that makes it easier to overcome them? Just that you're not selling to the same market? Is that it?
No, I would say not necessarily. Maybe because so remember the problem with the innovator's dilemma says that your whole organization, your management people and your salespeople are all oriented around your existing big customers. Whereas you don't want to adopt new technologies because they will serve niches. Once in a while, you'll find a foreign market that uses a different technology than you, and therefore it's an instantaneously large market, and you can sell your management on pivoting in order to serve the export market. But usually that's not true. Usually markets are fairly similar across countries. There's a bit of a lag, like Japan got like 3G tech, first and camera phones a little bit before us. But overall, I think rarely will you suddenly experience the existence suddenly a foreign export market that wants a completely different product, completely different technology will suddenly be dumped in your lap. I think that's pretty rare. But I will say that foreign markets give you the opportunity to expand new technologies very quickly. So if you're going to make hybrid cars, if Toyota had just been selling them into Japan, they would have had a much more difficult time than if they were selling them into Japan and everywhere else in the world. So they could expand very quickly with this new product.
Right. I'm more so thinking like take 5G for example, right? Many developing countries nowadays are just skipping straight to 5G, right? When there's less of a pre-existing market that is sort of, or not just sort of, like literally competing, right? Like with 3G, 4G, 5G, with these new technologies, then that'll create a pressure to not adopt a new one, right? Because it has a competitor that's widespread, that has a kind of incumbency
Sure.
advantage. Like the entire generation of technology has an incumbency advantage, while the new one, even if it's more efficient, doesn't, right?
Right. So exactly. So this is technological leapfrogging. We all know about this. Um, Technological leapfrogging can happen for the Christensen reason. It can happen for other reasons too. So, for example, Japanese electronics companies bet hard on mini discs and missed MP3s. So they didn't make good MP3 players because they bet that people would still use physical media. And actually, some Japanese companies wanted to bet on MP3s, but then the industrial policy bureaucrats told them not to. And so, in this sense, that was just a big fucking failure of industrial policy. But it can happen. So the reason why Chinese car companies are now like BYD is about to dominate the world and is coming to dominate cars in the world suddenly, just out of nowhere, was because of technological leapfrogging. And this is a classic Clay Christensen situation. Volkswagen, Toyota, GM, and Ford, all these traditional car companies have had a really tough time disrupting themselves. They are Christensened out, right?
Yep. And
They
is
are.
that because of the transition from just normal engines to EVs or hybrids?
It's exactly why. It's the transition from internal combustion to batteries. Their existing customers buy internal combustion cars. EVs were initially a niche market that they didn't want to enter. That allowed a startup like Tesla and also BYD, those startups to enter and to grow and to dominate. And now that batteries are getting super, super cheap and super high performance, they are disrupting the ICE car industry, the internal combustion car industry, allowing leapfrogging. The new companies happen to be in China. the fact that they are dominating is not necessarily, I think it's not due as much to the country advantages of China as people think. I think that, yes, China's government is paying everybody to produce too many cars, right? But I think that the argument for overcapacity is very strong in some industries like steel and solar power, that China's government is just paying people to produce too much. And there's, well, maybe foundational chips too. But in EVs, I don't buy it. I don't buy that explanation. I think there is overcapacity. I think that too many shitty EV companies have been kept on life support by the government, and those companies will all die. And their overproduction is eating into the profit margins of BYD. So BYD and the other, two or three top EV makers in China are not nearly as profitable as they ought to be, because you've got a bunch of shit ass companies flooding the market with product because the government's paying them to, and because banks are paying them to with cheap loans. So you've
Right,
got
you get this classic, narrative around Chinese EVs locking out American companies because they're subsidized. But in fact, that kind of happens domestically too,
right.
within China.
They're screwing, like BYD will win. They'll win that segment. But their profits are being massively held down by all these dork competitors just giving away free crap, free, not quite as good EVs with massive government subsidies and cheap bank loans, which are being diverted from the real estate sector. These banks are all local. These are local fucking banks in China. These local banks in China are huge, and they got much bigger after the Great Recession. So Great Recession comes along, and China's like, well, we can't have a recession. People might riot. The Communist Party might lose our grip on power. But then, so they were like, okay, well, we better keep growth going. What are we going to do? We're going to tell all the local banks, go lend. The big banks, national banks, and the local banks. Well, the big national banks will lend to whatever the government tells them, or they can also have their pick of just like new shit to invest in. They did invest in lots of real estate, but the local banks invested even more in real estate, because you're some small local bank, right, in like Guizhou or wherever the fuck. What are you going to lend to? And so you just lend to the local property developer, or you lend to infrastructure, right? Construction companies, real estate finance, anything with real estate. That's what you're a local bank. Local banks do real estate, and so you just shove money out the door because the government has said, shove money out the door. And so you're like, okay. And you shove money out the door to real estate. Then China lent too much to real estate, and then it all went bust it's going bust now. And so that was the problem. And then in like 2022, they're like, real estate going bust now. Well, you know what we really need, said Xi Jinping, is manufacturing. Manufacturing, son, that's the real economy. This real estate stuff is just a Ponzi bubble. Houses are for living in, not for investing in. And IT isn't real innovation. Let's invest in services. That just makes you decadent consumers. Instead, let's invest in manufacturing. This is how I imagine Xi talking in his own mind, in this sort of boomer dad, conservative
He's
boomer
just a
dad.
spiritual wasp.
He's a spiritual wasp. He's a spiritual and a boomer. He's like, have you ever seen the old movie The Graduate?
She is literally a boomer, right?
He's unironically a boomer. He is, 70 years old now?
Xi Jinping age.
71.
Yes, 71, literal boomer.
Born in 1953. He's a boomer. He's like my dad's age. Damn. Yeah, so she is a boomer, and boomers think this kind of stuff. He's not the smartest boomer in the world. He failed his exams, and they gave him a gentleman's C, so he's kind of like George W. Bush, because he was this favorite son, right? And he's really good at infighting, and he's really good at putting his people in key positions, and he's really good at taking power and riding herd on the Communist Party. He's really good at that. But he is fundamentally a boomer. And so he's like, okay, you know what? Fuck real estate. Real estate's busting, collapsing. Fine, good. Until like 2 weeks ago, right? Then he was like, okay, maybe we should do stimulus. But that realization was a long time in coming, and I would argue he hasn't fully realized all he needs to do yet, even now. And in fact, I'm pretty confident in that assessment that he will do more, right? Especially in terms of bailouts. But that's another story. Basically, they're like, okay, go lend to manufacturers. So you get your local bank, which lent to like their local property developer. Are they going to go try to get deal allocation or like start lending to like BYD and top companies? No. They're going to lend to the local, guy who comes along and says, I make electric cars. I make electric cars too. We could be big. We could be the next BYD, blah, blah. We could compete. And the narrator, they did not become the next BYD. But then they just shove loans out the door, and these people make like massive amounts of electric cars. And BYD is like, well, shit, we're going to win, but these people are competing. We've got to get higher margins. These local dipshits can't sell their cars in Europe because they don't have the scale and they don't have the quality, but we can. So they go to Europe and they're like, hey, Europe, how would you like a cheap EV? We know you want to decarbonize, right? You want to drive, and you don't mind like driving this cute little car that Americans might not like. You'll love this car, and Europeans like, ooh, BYD, it is very nice. I'll drive this car. It's zero emissions too. And then like the Europeans get it, and then they're just like driving their little BYD car around, and then the European governments are like, wait a second, our car industry is going to die because of these imports, so we better put tariffs on these imports. So that today they, I think, put 45% tariffs, which it will not be enough to stop BYD, by the way, but it'll slow them down a little bit, but it will not stop them. I think 100% tariffs would. But then, yeah. So China is Europe is going to pressure China to take all its to put all its car factories in Europe.
I see. And do they want those under kind of nominally European companies, or are they fine if they're just BYD companies or BYD
They'll
factories?
probably they'll probably have some joint venture requirement, but essentially, yes, it'll be BYD factories in Europe. So they're going to get
Okay,
FDI.
yeah, that's
And
just kind of a labor interest.
right. And so also like yeah, I don't exactly know if the European. So if BYD moves factories to like Thailand or somewhere, like I don't actually know if European tariffs will apply to those because they didn't look at the specifics, and Europe does things a little differently. But one good thing about all the tariffs that we and Europe are putting, and not just, by the way, not just us in Europe, Indonesia, Brazil, Turkey, and a lot of other sort of global South countries are starting to put big tariffs on Chinese products because they're also afraid of their local manufacturing industries being outcompeted and destroyed by the massive flood of Chinese stuff from this overcapacity lending boom, industrial lending boom, and subsidized blah, 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 right? They're scared too. Indonesia's scared. Brazil's scared. Turkey's scared. All these people are scared of the second China shock. So they're going to put up tariffs as well. These tariffs, the whole world will basically put up tariffs on Chinese stuff. That's good for the world. And I'll tell you why. Because Chinese companies are extremely home biased. They would much, much rather build a factory in China than anywhere else. They do not want to go build a factory in Vietnam. They do not want to go build a factory in Indonesia. They do not want to go build a factory in Turkey or Hungary or Poland. They want to build a factory in China. It's what they know. It's close to home. They can get all these, various subsidies. They can like get cheap land. They know how the whole market works. They can sell easily to Chinese customers, blah, blah. They want to build factories in China. They do not want to go overseas. But usually, for most countries, that home bias is only overcome once they become quite rich and once the costs get so high that they just can't do anything else other than go overseas, right? That's what happened to, and still sometimes they don't. That's what happened to like Japan. That's what happened to America. It's what happened to like Germany and Korea. But China, um, it's happening too earlier. Their companies are already going out, even though China is only at about like 18K, 20K of per capita GDP. Um, Chinese
And why is
companies are,
that?
pardon?
And why are they heading out so early?
Because of tariffs. They want to
Right.
get around the tariffs.
Ton of sense.
And so if the tariffs are based on where the product is assembled, they're like, well, we'll assemble elsewhere. So Chinese companies, especially in EVs and batteries, are now pouring massive amounts of FDI, just giant flood of FDI into other countries. And in the textile industry too, they're doing this, and labor intensive stuff. That's more because of costs, labor costs. Um, People don't realize, by the way, that China's like working age population as a percent of the total peaked in the late 2010s. Like that was very recent. China has not, like China's population is aging so fast that now the whole population is shrinking. But the peak of the working age population as a percent of the total was actually just a few years ago. So China is now being hit with aging that it did not was not being hit with 5, 6 years ago or seven
Right,
years
and
ago.
because of the structure of the one-child policy, these kind of declines are just so much sharper than you see them anywhere else in the world.
Right.
Except maybe
So
South Korea. South Korea. Why is South Korea the way it is with fertility?
I don't know, man.
Yeah, it's a mystery.
I don't know. I don't understand Korean culture. If you
Yeah,
find out, let me know.
for sure.
But yeah, no one in Korea wants to have any kids. But then Japan's fertility rate is like almost twice that of Korea now. It's crazy.
Right. What? Why is maybe this is an easier question. Why is Japan's fertility rate seemingly kind of less bad now compared to the rest of East Asia?
Oh, well, one reason is because housing is less expensive in Japan. Japan builds just tons of housing. And this makes housing more affordable. You can afford to have a family a little easier. Um,
But you can
another
in China as well, right?
No, you cannot afford to have a family in China.
No, don't they have like too much housing bubble?
Well, yeah, but look at the prices. I mean, they have a ton of housing, but look at the freaking prices on that housing. Like the cost of a house in Shanghai relative to, you know, income is far, far higher than like San Francisco. Let's look at price to income by city. Um, let's look at these. Let's look at Reddit, the gold standard of. Oh no, that's only America. Um, let's look at Business Insider, the gold standard of information everywhere.
Second
Um,
only to Reddit.
second only to Reddit. This is for 2016. Median home price divided by median income. So this is a little while ago, but Hong Kong 18, Beijing 14, Shanghai 14. In Shanghai, a house is 14 years of income.
Oh my goodness.
In New York, it is 6.
Huh, New Yorkers doing not too bad for themselves.
In San Francisco, it's 9, and Los Angeles. Um, in Tianjin, it's 10, or it was 10. In Hainan, which is like no one's idea of a great place to live, it's 12. Like,
What the hell? Okay,
right?
today I learned.
Yeah, like no one can afford a fucking house in China, or they couldn't. I mean, now prices are just falling off a cliff, so they will become affordable, more affordable. But yeah, affordable housing in Japan is a big one. Um, uh, yeah, I can't explain other differences, but I think certainly the fact that Japan builds more housing than anybody has got to have something to do with it. Um, yeah, I don't know what else, honestly. I mean, Japan's fertility is similar to that of Europe or like Germany or whatever.
Yeah, fair enough.
So fertility now everywhere is going down yet again. So who the hell knows? We're all going to die out. Humanity's going to be extinct. I don't know what to do about that. I'll think about it later.
Yeah, any strong fertility takes we can. Um,
Yeah. Certainly Elon yelling about fertility on Twitter is going to do precisely dick all.
yeah, yeah. I don't know. Well, like Vance and Walls, I think Kamala as well are all endorsing a child tax credit, right? So
They
maybe
are, but like the degree to which that increases fertility is very small. Like
fair enough.
subsidies for
Yeah.
child rearing, like they do move the needle a little bit, but it's like a tiny bit. It's like a huge subsidy could increase your fertility by like zero point 0.1.
Yeah. Well, the Robin Hanson take is that you just need to raise it high enough, right?
Right. No, I mean, what people are going to try, what nobody's trying yet, but what people are going to try, which may cause riots and anger, but what they will eventually, someone will eventually try, cutting off old age pensions for childless people.
Oh yeah, this is my take. Yeah.
If you don't have kids, you don't get, the government will not take care of you if you don't have kids. Someone's going to try that. It won't be the US, but it'll be someone. I suspect it'll be China or maybe some small dictatorial country, or maybe some East European country. I don't know who will try it, but someone will try this shit. Hungary, I don't know. Someone will try it, and it's going to make people insanely mad. Obviously, they'll phase it in because, like, if you're already old and you can't have kids, then this won't apply to you. But it'll say like, if you're okay, starting with the people who are like 20 now, you will not get pensions unless you have kids. So you better have some fucking kids. And then people will be like, no, I'm not a baby making machine. And like, yes, you are. And then so someone's going to try that. And whether or not you can actually browbeat people into having kids with the threat of abject poverty and old age, or whether or not they'll bet that they'll just not have kids and bet that the policy will be reversed. Who knows? So that's yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is my kind of speculative fiction scenario, is that you have both the conditioning of pensions, of state pensions on children, and you have widespread euthanasia. You get like the Canada Hungary nexus.
Right. So Canada is doing euthanasia. They've just decided that euthanasia is this really important human right that you should be able to be, like I stub my toe,
Yes,
kill
and that
yourself.
will be the justification for it. The justification for it will be,
Yeah.
I put it in the US context, actually. It'll be just, well, there was just nothing we could do. It's just the process. This will be like the retroactive justification for just like the automatic, social security cut,
Right.
right? It's just, it was just the process. It was just the natural process of that the founding fathers had in mind,
Right.
for the case where Social Security runs out. I'm being a little
We're
hyperbolic
gonna have
here, but it'll
euthanasia
be,
for incels. We're
you
gonna
know,
say like, oh, incel, that's a condition. Incel disorder is a condition that requires euthanasia, and there's nothing we can do for you. You better just KYS, right? And then
yeah, yeah,
And then that then all the like guys who go online and convince themselves that they'll never get laid because their like wrist is the wrong shape or whatever dumb shit, body dysmorphic disorder they have, they'll kill themselves with the assistance of the state, and then the gender ratio will improve, and then like women will be beating down men's door, and then men will be a hot commodity because all the incels just were killed. No, I don't know. That's not really gonna happen. I made that up.
that's
It was an
that's
excuse
a
to
bit
laugh at
further
incels.
than I would like to speculate.
All
But
right. I just like to laugh at the incels because like, bro, you went online and you found companionship and friendship by mutually convincing each other that you were unfuckable. Like, that's the dumbest move I've ever seen.
yeah, that's a very strange thing to have companionship over. But
Yes.
no,
You just
I do.
you just play
But
video
like
games?
my version of this fertility take is unironic. I unironically think that this is going to happen. That people are going to initially have just widespread pension cuts, and then do exactly what you're saying. I think unironically, of conditioning pensions on number of children, and combining this with widespread euthanasia, because this I think is just the it sort of just is the solve for the equilibrium position, right? There is just this externality right now. We often speak of government policy as removing externalities, but right now the pension system is just itself this huge externality where it's paid in by the next generation, and it's paid out regardless of whether you've contributed to the next generation. It's just this massive externality. And if you're just making a kind of linear, to bivariate forecast of, we're creating this externality, which incentivizes against having children. What do you expect? Surprise, surprise, there's fewer children. Wow, shocking. So I
Shocking.
think that it's just such a large kind of budget item that it's going to be corrected in some way, and I think it's going to be corrected by exactly this, unironically.
Yeah, you're right. It's gonna happen.
Yeah, it's quite dark. I'm not
So
sure I have a
green,
moral
man.
take on this yet, but
I
I
wonder if
think it
there's an
will be what
option you can
happens.
you can allow yourself to be fed to the animal, like to be fed to pets. As pet, you can have your body become pet food. Like you donate your body to science. You can have your body cremated. You can donate your like various parts of your body to various like good causes. But can I actually turn my body into pet food? Because I would like to.
The pets, they're eating the
They're eating the people. The pets
they're
are
eating
eating
the
the
people.
immigrants. I would like to feed myself to the cats so that the cats can get us one
They
back
get their
for all those
revenge.
Haitians in Springfield who ate all the cats,
Oh my goodness, this is such an insane timeline. Okay, so I've had my fun. I've had my speculation.
It's
Let's
gonna get
return to the
weirder.
main.
This is
Let's
how we
return
boost
to
your
the main
podcast. Like here you
segments.
can come hear Noah talk about executing incels and feeding yourself to the cats.
Yes, revenge for the
And
cats.
weaves,
Yeah, and the weeb economy, which is an unironic take.
which is an unironic take. That's
Yeah.
true.
So let's return to, I think, really a major lesson for America here. I think Tyler had a column making a very similar point that, even now creative destruction is very underrated. That often politicians will speak of will speak of having protectionism to prevent domestic industries from being outcompeted. But Tyler, of course, drawing from Schumpeter, has this take of, in fact, you want the domestic industries to be outcompeted if they are going to, right? Or like it's worse than that, right? Because like you said with the EVs, it's not just protectionism from foreign competitors, but protectionism from kind of domestic competition as well, where you just don't get the innovation you need. So you need people to be much more willing to accept that kind of competition. Even just like in the case of China, even just like very very local banks and companies to stop being so attached to those. Oh no,
So the answer to what they
sorry.
really need to do in
Yeah, let's
China,
hear it.
bail out the banks. The banks have too much shitty real estate loans on their books, and they need to just be bailed out. China will do this. Bail out the local government financing vehicles too. Bail them out and then roll them up because the local government financing vehicles. If you don't know how these work, there's a really good post by Jonathan Sine, or however that's pronounced, at cogitations.co about LGFVs that will explain most of how they work and pretty well. And so they became conglomerates. So the LGFV would basically they would borrow on behalf of local governments to build infrastructure, and then local governments would sort of pay them back with transferring land. So they were the way by which local governments raise revenue with land sales, but they also then became conglomerates. They just put their greasy little paws in every sort of local enterprise. And so just everything from like canning fish to like massage parlors, anything with local government financing vehicles would own all this stuff. They ran everything so badly, and honestly, the property developers that they lent to, especially after 2008, were just shitty developers who would just like throw up any old apartment block, any old mall. Like in China, it looks like people just built like any old thing, right? You go to Japan and you're like, yeah, they build a lot, but like it looks like this mall needed to be here and there's people there, right? This shopping center was actually a great thing to build. This housing complex was actually a great thing to build. There's people here. It looks fucking good, right? In China, it's just like, why is this here? Who ordered this? Apartment.
Literally some like random local bank.
Yeah, it's some random local bank. And then multiply that by 10,000. Like, I do not like the way Chinese cities look. Now, I haven't been to China proper since I've been to Hong Kong, but I haven't been to China proper since 2011, I think. And so I haven't seen the way modern Chinese cities look up close, but I spend an inordinate amount of time watching walking tours of Chinese cities and also drone overflights. But then walking tours are better. And so all these random Chinese people will just go out there with a GoPro or whatever they got, right? And just walk around for hours, and Noah Smith will watch that. And so I love that because it gives me this feel for like what it is, how it is to get around a city, what it's like to exist physically in a city without actually going there. It's great. These random YouTubers are my telepresence robots. I swear to God. What I've realized is that Chinese people live in Russian style apartment blocks, like tower blocks, and shop at American style malls, which they get to with a combination of American style highways and Russian style trains.
Oh no.
So basically, it's America crossed with Russia. That's what China is like. Culturally, they're more American, but their government decided that like Russia was this model to emulate on all things. But like culturally, they're very similar to America. It's like an America ruled by Russia would be China.
That's just, oh, that's bleak. That's bleak. The fertility rate makes sense now. The fertility rate makes
Right.
sense now.
Um, because like Chinese culture is so similar to American culture. Like everyone is born thinking like I'm gonna get rich. I don't know how, but I'm gonna get rich. And then like yeah, everyone has these big unrealistic dreams, and then everyone just like wears slobby clothes and like drives to the mall and shops in like Crocs and shorts and like watches their big TV and watches the nationalistic news and says like my country's great because it's big. Yeah, big. And then like and then everyone's obsessed with real estate. Like, oh, my house is going up, up, up. It's going to make me all this money. Everyone's just obsessed with real estate. People cut corners at work. Like people eat large quantities of like kind of honestly kind of greasy, crappy food. And
Oh,
like,
oh, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. The
like,
like fried squid. That's like something that's like super American.
yeah, and like it's America. It's just not the people running it are not like the people running us because we have this democracy or whatever. But honestly, like um China's culture is just very American. And of course, my armchair theory for this, and a lot of people agree with me about this, but my armchair theory is that it's because America didn't have an ancestral culture to begin with, whereas China destroyed theirs in the communist period and like sort of had a hard reset. And basically into this void of culture, we both just poured consumerism and cheap shit and getting rich and capitalism. Like that was just what we made as our culture because we started off with that. And in China, it's like, well, we don't have like all the traditional shit anymore. We don't have like geomancy and weddings with big red hats anymore. And like, whatever you had. And then,
Yeah, America and China are the most Landian nations.
yeah, yeah. And so that happened. And then one day I hope that China's rulers will stop being people who think that Russia is like the model for shit.
Yeah, yeah. Oh man, I just want like translated Xi Jinping speeches read out loud in a Texan accent now.
Well, I'm sure there's an AI that can do that today.
Yeah, yeah. This is the killer app.
AI text to voice accents. Hold on. AI text to voice in accents. Authentic AI voice narrator built to. Oh wow, there's like tons of sponsored links on Google.
Yeah, I've
Um,
tried the 11 Labs one. It's like it's okay. But yeah, this was like a few weeks ago, so maybe it's better now. I don't know.
yeah,
But yeah, this is the killer app.
yeah. This is the killer app.
Um,
Um,
but I absolutely agree. This is I think is you know one of our favorite mutual takes that like yeah, there's just so much culture. I think compared to any other two countries in the world, American, especially like enterprise culture, this is like this is the thing with like SF culture and like Shenzhen culture as well. Like like founder mode. You've heard of founder mode, right?
yeah,
Yeah, this is like
counter mode.
this is Shenzhen culture as well. This is everything. China is America from like either 10 years in the past or 10 years in the future.
All right. Do you want me to read some Xi Jinping in a Texan accent?
Okay, let's do it.
All right. This is the text of Xi Jinping's report to the 20th National Congress of the Communist Party on October 16th, 2022. This is a translation by Nikkei Asia. Hold high the great banner of socialism with Chinese characteristics and strive in unity to build a modern socialist country in all respects. Comrades, on behalf of the 19th Central Committee of the Communist Party of China, CPC, I will now deliver a report to the 20th National Congress. The 20th National Congress of the Communist Party of China is a meeting of great importance. It takes place at a critical time as the entire party and the Chinese people of all ethnic groups embark on a new journey to build China in a modern socialist country in all respects and advance toward the second centenary goal. The theme of this Congress is holding high the great banner socialism with Chinese characteristics, fully implementing the thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era, carrying forward the great founding spirit of the party, staying confident in building strength, upholding fundamental principles, breaking new ground, forging ahead with enterprise and fortitude, and striving in unity to build a modern socialist country in all respects and advance the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation on all fronts.
Yeah, so this is going in the intro with no context.
With no context. It's just Noah Smith in a ludicrously exaggerated Texan accent reading Xi Jinping.
Yes.
That's why this is the best podcast.
That's also going in the intro. Let's go.
We can just do insane stuff like Dwarkesh, eat your heart out. Dwarkesh is preparing very carefully for all his interviews, asking intellectual questions, and we're just reading Xi Jinping in a Texas accent.
Yes. This is the true future. This is the future of content. But anyways, let's return to and actually take a moment to pivot to the second half of the interview, where I want to talk about energy. Let's take the battery pill.
Energy. Can I say science, energy, science, energy?
Why do growth rates for energy matter? Why do learning curves for energy matter? And what does that tell us about nuclear versus solar?
40 years ago, we should have built a shit ton of nuclear power plants. We'd have so much lower carbon emissions right now than we do. We wouldn't have much cheaper electricity than we do, but we'd have slightly cheaper electricity, and we would have had much fewer emissions. France did. We know this because France did it. France built up a nuclear powered economy, largely in the 80s, some in the 70s, largely in the 80s. Our nuclear regulation just was really, really stupid and insane, whereas France's was not. But then regulation stopped us from building nuclear power plants in the 80s. So we stopped. France built up a nuclear economy while we only got to like 20 something percent nuclear, 20% nuclear for electricity. And this sucked. This meant we had much higher carbon emissions. We had, whatever. We should have built nuclear. But here's the thing. Nuclear, even for the countries that allow it and don't have insane regulations like South Korea, nuclear doesn't have much of a learning curve. So for things with a learning curve, when you build more of it, the price goes down. And it goes down for a couple of reasons. One is scale effects. So you build up scale and you actually get lower prices. And then learning by doing is another one. So you learn how to do it cheaper as you go on. Just practice makes you better at it. So there's other reasons too. But anyway, there's learning curves. And to anything that can be built in a factory tends to have a learning curve. Anything that is built on site tends not to have a learning curve or to have a very shallow learning curve. So, for example, things that do not have learning curves: mining, home building, factory, like commercial building construction, any construction, nuclear power. Things that do have a learning curve include prefab housing, solar modules, batteries, and also the little nuclear power plants they put on submarines. So there's nothing inherent to nuclear technology that makes it not have a learning curve, except being built on site, which it is. Even a small modular reactor is built on site, and of course, NuScale, the great hope of small modular reactors, came in like way over, insanely over budget, and then canceled its pilot project. They just sucked and died because not just because of regulation. I mean, regulation is obviously important, but because you can't really drive down costs a lot.
Yeah. So all of these things in factory lines, you can think of, this is obviously for the audience. You can think of all of these things in the factory lines, self-optimizing, or not literally self-optimizing, but as you do the process, you run into, these problems, you resolve the problems within that site, things become more and more optimized. This is just not true with things that you go out into the field and build.
Right.
Yeah, and so nuclear is just kind of not improving in this way, and solar is.
Yeah.
Right. Do I have that right?
You have that right. Now, of course, the part installation of solar doesn't improve this way.
Yeah.
So solar, the modules continue to get cheaper, but at this point, the modules are a negligible part of the construction cost. Now, the work of lowering costs is about improving land acquisition and permitting, so you can get the land, because solar doesn't take nearly as much land as, say, wind, but it takes a lot more land than, say, nuclear or coal. Um, and so or gas. And so then so getting land, so then, um, finding basically ways to lower land acquisition costs, permitting, construction, all these things called the balance of system costs, as well as recycling and maintenance. So those costs are actually dropping, but they're not dropping at like an exponential rate. We're like pushing them down slowly. So we've reached that point, but solar is already insanely cheap, and it's only getting cheaper over time. And now it's getting more reliable because of storage, because batteries, which are built in a factory and which are very, very easy to install, don't take much land at all. It's one built little building. Batteries are getting so good so fast that they're solving the storage problem for solar.
Right. So I saw in the news recently, there's talks to restart 3 Mile Island for machine learning data centers. There's apparently, some political movement, some negotiation towards nuclear energy. I would assume that there's some kind of cost benefit calculation going on within each of these companies. Why aren't they choosing solar?
I mean, so solar is being built much more than like nuclear or whatever. Um, so what a lot of people are doing is restarting old nuclear plants. The cool thing about restarting an old nuclear plant is that it has been built.
Yeah.
You do not have to go out and build it. You have to refurbish it and start it up. That involves some fixed cost, but the cost of building the thing is pretty much done, is paid. Like 3 Mile Island, that reactor is just sitting there, right? It exists. You can go use it. And, you have to make sure everything is in working order, the concrete's not cracked, whatever. But like you can go refurbish it and you can use it. And it's much, much cheaper than building a new one. So a lot of people are trying to resuscitate these old nuclear plants, but that will only last for a short time. It's good to do this. But building a new nuclear plant, as Georgia showed, will take many years. Actually, honestly, a lot of these refurbished nuclear plants, they're never going to happen. They will not actually be completed.
Why is that?
Well, first of all, because we're going to have an AI bust, but also because the expenses will prove larger and the technical challenges greater than people expect.
Okay, so it's just going to come in so over budget that people are not going to decide
Yeah,
to continue. That's unfortunate.
yeah. And
So
so
basically, there's both an underestimating of the costs, and the real costs are already already lower than can be generalized because these are existing plants.
exactly,
Got it.
you've got it.
So
So yeah. Anyway,
I
but it's cool
mean,
they're doing it, and I will say that Biden is the most pro-nuclear president in my lifetime by far.
that's true. Yeah.
So
So what's interesting, or no, I can't just let this go. You can't come on the From the New World podcast and say there's going to be an AI bust, and for me to let that go. Why
oh
is there
yeah, yeah,
going
yeah.
to be
Let's
an
do it.
AI bust?
Yeah, there'll be an AI bust. There will, I believe, be an AI bust.
Any particular reason for the AI bust?
Yes. So there's basically a couple. I think there's two basic kinds of technologies that get adopted widely. There's two basic patterns. The first basic pattern is that a new technology comes along that's a good direct replacement for things that you already do. So, for example, Excel came along. It was an exact replacement for paper spreadsheets. You can just get rid of your paper, put in Excel. Not hard. Not hard to think about how to use it because the use case is already there. And it's just the technology duplicates in a much better, easier way something that already exists, right? Cars, they run on roads just like horses. Okay. The second is technologies that are very general purpose and whose uses are not immediately apparent, whose best uses are not immediately apparent. So, for example, electricity. The famous story, do you know the famous story of like electricity and factory productivity?
No, I don't.
So have you ever seen those like ancient Mickey Mouse cartoons where he's on this assembly line where it just keeps moving at a constant rate and he's like dodging all these like drill presses and things,
Yeah.
like stamping machines? Um, that's how factories used to be in the age of steam boilers. Have you ever been to that cable car museum in San Francisco?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's how that the same thing, the same way it drove the cable cars was how they drive a conveyor belt at a factory. And that's how you do production. It was all in series. You just like, I'm standing at my thing, weld, 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 and then that's how things worked, right? And then they got electricity, and people are like, new power source, electricity. So some factory owners are like, hot dog, let's try it. And so then they ripped out their steam boiler and they put in an electric dynamo instead. And what do you think happened? Well, they lost money because guess what? Until recently, that was just not very efficient. Like converting steam to electricity and then using it to run your conveyor belt is less efficient than converting steam to mechanical energy and having it run your conveyor belt. That's just physics. So they
Right.
all lost money. And they were like, well, fuck this electricity bullshit. But then 20 years later, some brilliant factory owners got this new idea. They're like, okay, what if we just organized our whole factories in a different way? And instead of one big conveyor belt, what if we had a whole bunch of little workstations? And we could run little wires to the workstations, which you can't do with steam really easily. Steam doesn't really parallelize very easily, but electricity does. You can run electricity to a whole bunch of little machines, and we run each machine at like low power. And not only that, we can address more resources toward the bottleneck. Because remember, when you're running everything in series, you're held up by your limiting step, right? Your slowest step is your thing that holds up your whole conveyor belt. They didn't really like run constantly. They like ran in little fits and starts because the slowest person was always holding them up. And then they'd yell at you and like, fire you and whatever, get some new cheap labor, and then there would be a strike. Anyway, so then they changed factories so they could put, also with that, you can put it on multiple floors. You can put the factory on multiple floors. So now you take your little piece of whatever it is and take it over to this machine and do this, and take it over to that machine and do that. And you just move the thing to the machine around the floor, and you can put more stations of the type where you need to overwhelm the bottleneck with resources.
Sure.
Huge productivity improvements from this for decades and decades in manufacturing. But it took them 20 years to start doing this. And I would say the internet has been somewhat similar, where we're just now figuring out how to use internet to do remote work. And so AI came in, and everybody viewed it, partly because this is because of marketing, like, oh, it's going to replace humans. Everybody thought of it as just a thing you rip out your human and you put in an AI. And for a very few things, that makes sense. So call centers, like, yes, you can use a chatbot. There are a few things for which just replacing a human with an AI one for one makes sense. And the hyperscalers, Dario Amodei of Anthropic, will come on. He came on Eric and my podcast and said, once AI gets good enough, all the dumbass use cases of directly replacing humans with AI become viable. AI is not very good at replacing humans one for one. It's good as a production tool. You have a coder who uses GitHub Copilot to produce software more effectively. Business people can use AI to like read and summarize emails or send out emails or things. It's humans using AI as a machine tool. That's what we're seeing. And that, I believe, will take decades for people to figure out, just like it took for electricity, just like it took for the internet. It will take probably a couple decades for human organizations to figure out how to use AI to change their whole production process and reorient their production around AI, the way they reoriented around electricity, the way they reoriented it around the internet, et cetera. I think they'll have to reorient their production around AI, and this will change business models and produce a huge productivity boom, but it will take decades. And in the meantime, all the GPUs that everybody's buying, there won't be the revenue to support that because those business models won't exist.
Yeah, so all of this expansion is driven by a kind of horseless carriage fallacy, right? The horseless carriage fallacy, of course, being that a car would just be like a horse, but or just be like a carriage, but without the horse.
Cars replacing horses was actually a more simple direct substitution than I think AI replacing humans will be,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
replacing human tasks.
And it's funny that it's Dario who's saying this because in many cases their name, Anthropic, that will be like the horseless carriage of today. It's literally the same thing.
They're saying their AI will be more like humans, like literally from the name. It'll be the opposite, and they'll miss out because of that.
And so
That's hilarious.
I think you're going
That's
to get this Gartner
fantastic.
hype cycle pattern. Now, the Gartner hype cycle obviously doesn't happen for everything. Sometimes things just get installed. There's no bust, right? When it's easy to figure out how to use the thing, there's no bust. When it's hard to figure out how to use the thing, everyone gets excited about the thing and its capabilities, but people don't think about the use case as much. Then you have this bust, and then it comes back when they figure out the use cases. So, for example, you saw this with the .com bust, right? Like there was this big bust, and then it came back. It came back pretty quick too. Like Google's IPO was just a couple of years later, um, and then Facebook, and then you're off to the races. You're back. Internet was back, right? And and so I think you're going to get that with AI. I think you're going to get a big bust when people realize that AI isn't bringing in any revenue, and Nvidia's stock will go down, but they'll still be fine. But like their stock will go down a lot, and a lot of companies will vaporize. And I think I would not necessarily bet on OpenAI, but maybe. Um, but then a lot of companies will vaporize, and uh, even some big ones. You know, um, yeah, who knows which ones, right? So I think you're going to have this big bust, and everybody's going to go, no, big bust, and then everyone who writes about these things without understanding it for the New York Times will go like, ha ha ha, you
AI is
failed, like
over.
you fail,
Yeah.
tech people, you fail. And then like, a couple years later, like somebody will like be like, oh, whoa, we can actually use AI to do this amazing thing. Like Google's like, wow, we can just make search really good. Facebook's like, wow, we can use the internet to make social media. And then you'll get, and I don't know what it is because I'm not, Sergey Brin or Mark Zuckerberg or whatever. And so then you're going to get AI coming in and saying, and just, creating massive new businesses, and Nvidia stock will go back up, and and OpenAI if they're still around, and Anthropic if they're still around, and all these companies they'll become researchers and suppliers for those kind of things, and then those businesses will be huge, and they will grow to be $1 trillion businesses or whatever, right? And so and then then all the AI people get hired back, and it will become much more. But then there'll be a flood of people who study AI, and the market will get glutted, just like it did with like web devs, and like um, and this whole thing will happen. I think this is what I think will happen. I think this is the most likely case. Um, Dario doesn't believe that. Dario believes that AI capabilities will keep getting better so fast that it'll be more like the situation where we don't have to invent new business models around AI. We can keep all our old business models and just rip the humans out of them and put the AI in.
See, that seems particularly crazy to me because to me, like the more the capabilities advance, the higher the kind of variance of AI capability minus human capability will be. Right. So even in the scenario where Anthropic is correct, I don't know, maybe Anthropic's stock is higher than in the scenario where you describe. But to me, the horseless carriage stuff seems even more incorrect in that case.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Because like once you get, I do not think that the viability of dumbass use cases will make dumbass use cases the most important or productive use cases.
Precise. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
They may be
And
viable, but they won't be the biggest thing.
yeah, well, what's
The question
interesting
is
is that,
how.
yeah, the kind of previous generation of AI models or AI companies are more of this kind of research, deep techish focus. And there is, to be fair, there is a bit of emerging, competition on that front. Stuff like Ilya's company or Feifei's company. Um,
Yeah,
well, Feifei's company, not quite, right? They're not doing language models; they're doing these like spatial models. Um, but in large part, I think that the current wave of like new investment, or at least investment in new companies, I should say, not necessarily new investment in like companies that already exist, but investment in new companies, are these people who are trying to find better use cases for AI, right? The meme version of this is that, oh, they're all just GPT wrappers, but in a way, like we need more people thinking about how to properly wrap GPTs, right?
uh-huh.
There's I just want to
Right.
take
Like, is a factory a wrapper for electricity?
yeah, exactly, yeah.
Is Google a wrapper for TCP/IP and HTML? Like, Are these things just wrappers? No.
Yeah. So
Google's a wrapper for a Victory auction, all right? It's, Google's a wrapper for economics.
yeah. So given that, like I just want to give a bit more color on what this bust will look like. So like OpenAI stock down, Nvidia stock down. Does like the AI portfolio of like, I don't know, Sequoia go down?
Um,
Or like random VCs who are making like rounds today?
I don't know because that's all. It's VC is actually private equity, and you don't get to see what they're investing in. We've got some data sets like Preqin that analyze their returns years after the fact that you have to pay to get access to, and we've got PitchBook, which is just surveys, and some people talk to PitchBook and other people don't. I see people, I talk to VCs who say like generative AI is 100% of their deal flow right now. And then, but I look at the total, the stock of VC money invested, it's much lower. It's like 20% or 15% or something, right? It's much, much lower because there's still all those investments that got made before the crash of 22.
Yep.
But in terms of what percent of new deal money is going to generative AI, I actually don't know the data for that. Like you could
Okay.
probably back it out from from like the time series of total stock of things, but then other things can change at the same time. So it's hard. Like I don't actually know how much of VC's money is getting poured into AI versus, SaaS and crypto and God knows what, deep tech.
Yeah, fair enough.
I don't know.
Still, I think there's still some usefulness in making that prediction, even if not all of the VC data ends up visible. But let's say like 10 years from now, right? Do the investments in the GPT wrappers. We went over why that's not accurate for various reasons. But the companies who are trying to uh, commercialize LLMs, for example, will those go up or down?
Um,
Like the companies that are taking, OpenAI's API as a basically like as an input and doing something else with it, do those go up or down?
I have no idea because I haven't seen what they're doing. I don't even know what they're doing. Like I'm just uninformed there, you know?
Yeah, that's fair enough. Um,
So,
uh,
yeah, no, I mean, you could tell me that your guess will be better than mine in that case because I don't actually know what their business models or their products are. Like I know character AI, like which I think is mid. Um, I think that yeah, I haven't seen anything that really impresses me. Like wow, but I actually think for AI art stuff, that's what people are sleeping on. I think that for industrial design and for a lot of other stuff like AI art will have more immediate use cases than chatbots. I think people are over optimistic about the simplistic about how creative they're over optimistic about how creative you'll have to get to use chatbots well. I think chatbots talk like a person, but
they don't
they
respond like a person.
they don't respond like a person, and
They
that
don't like follow work patterns the same way.
they don't follow work patterns. And agentifying is very hard, but also they just lie constantly. They have no internal state. They have no understanding of truth. But like AI art can just create visual shit. Like you're like, okay, give me 10 possible designs for a table. And you can have an AI give you 10 possible designs for a table. You pick one, you refine it, and then you go. Like ideation is just so powerful. So for like industrial design, the amount of money we spend on industrial design is huge. Or storyboarding or ad campaigns or, uh, all these things that we use visual imagery for. We generate visual imagery. I think that logos and branding, right? Things like that. AI is just going to be really useful immediately for that in the like in the sort of visual generative diffusion models, whatever space. And so I think
Yeah, that's
everyone
actually my go-to example of how AI is, sheerly growing the pie. Is that like if you were if you were like a 21st or a 20th century president, right? 20th century president of the United States, you could not just get art designs this quickly, right? You could maybe, ask an employee, someone who you paid much more for to, do a piece, and then they'd be back to you in, I don't know what, a week, maybe a day if it's relatively simple. But now you can get, maybe not exactly that quality, but close to it in like what, 30 seconds? It's crazy.
Right. It's crazy.
'Cause, yeah,
Like,
people,
yeah.
I don't know if within industry they underrate it, but certainly the general public underrates AI art.
Yeah. Because they think, because it's not going to really be like, I think art is a relatively limited application of it, and everyone's thinking about it in terms of art. Everyone's thinking about it in terms of like painting a painting, whatever. But I think that most of the art that we do, if you talk to people who are artists, most of the art they do for work is incredibly boring shit.
Yeah, it's like
Right? Designing a
art
logo.
resources, whatever. Yeah,
Yeah.
brand resources,
Designing a
that kind of thing.
logo. We're going to have comic books illustrated by AI where a normal person can write the script of a comic book, and then AI will give them like 20 different ways the panel could look, and they'll pick one. And that's how you'll write a comic book.
Yeah, I mean, I am excited for that. Yeah,
It's going to be pretty cool. AI will do the what do you call the fill in frames and animation between the keyframes?
I have no clue.
AI will do that. It's just interpolation. I mean, it's just interpolation over a higher degree polynomial. Like,
Yeah.
that was the most precious thing I've said on this whole podcast. It's just interpolation over a higher degree polynomial. Oh God, kill me. Anyway, so
I lead us to improve on the solo model.
improve on the solo model. Well, we have improved on the solo model. We have the Chad Jones, sort of like sub exponential endogenous growth model. And I should write a post about that. The best growth model in the world.
Okay, that's a strong endorsement. I will read it, even
Yeah.
faster. Although I can't.
There's
I don't think I
a
can read it before I ask the next question. Or explain the solo model. Explain
the solo model
how
says
it differs.
technology. The solo model says total factor productivity falls out of a tree, and you take advantage of it by, building machines.
So you're
This
telling
model
me.
says that
I'm
actually
sorry.
ideas don't fall out of a tree. You have to produce them, but they get more expensive to produce as you produce more of them. You pick the low hanging fruit. So they get more expensive to produce as you produce more of them. And so basically, you can accelerate your growth by throwing more money towards research for a while, but then that taps out too. And your long run growth is determined by the rate of population growth. So that if we have low fertility, our living standards will in fact stagnate because there won't be enough people to like research shit. Unless we change the capital labor substitution in the technology production function so that we have AI researchers who are basically automated scientists. And then we're okay.
I don't know if they're quite automated scientists, but I definitely think they're research applications of like O1,
Right.
right? Or even just like the regular,
They don't have to be
ChatGPT.
right. They don't have to be fully automated scientists. What you need is to have a change such that the science production not just becomes more capital intensive, but becomes more substitutable between capital and labor.
Right. Is that the case now? On the margins, I definitely think it becomes more substitutable. If anything, only because you're allowing your best scientists to just do more.
Right.
Actually, maybe that doesn't make it more substitutable.
I don't know. So it's very difficult to go from like micro observations of how things work at the technological and business level to, sort of how things end up shaking out at the macro level. Like sometimes
Fair
you can get a
enough.
connection, but then a lot of times it's like, we don't know why this happened.
Okay, so are all of the nuclear enthusiasts, or are they just barking up the wrong tree?
Well, to some extent, I mean, there are special cases in which we will need nuclear. So places without a lot of land to build solar will need more nuclear. Places where you have to put the energy really close and you can't, there's some physical barrier that stops you, or maybe even a legal barrier, but a physical barrier that stops you from building out a big transmission line from your, plant to your city, like nuclear will need to be there. The better batteries get, the less you need nuclear as a backup. And honestly, nuclear is not a good backup for solar because gas plants are used as peaker plants. They're used as backup for solar because you can quickly turn them on and off. Gas plant, basically, you turn it on by like, you turn a valve, gas goes through, you burn it. Nuclear plants, you've got to go through this whole rigmarole of warming them up, of like shutting them down and turning them on. It's that's how they
And is
work.
the main problem their time or cost or some other?
Time,
Okay.
time. It's slow to start up and slow then shut off a nuclear plant. Also, it's not great for seasonal storage because seasonal storage means you'll only be able to use it for a small amount of the time in the winter. So like, are you going to build a whole nuclear plant to use for 2 months in the winter? No, you're not. Actually, that's the problem with batteries for seasonal storage too. It turns out the secret to seasonal storage is just build a little extra solar so that you catch the weak sunlight. Matt Iglesias the other day came up with this rebuttal to my nuclear piece, and he said, look, man, we need nuclear for seasonal storage." And I'm like, no one's going to build it for seasonal storage because if you only use it for 2 months out of the year, you've multiplied the effective cost by 6.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Right. What is the actual variation in energy captured between seasons?
In 70% increase,
41% decrease?
41%
Yeah.
decrease. So yeah, so that's about what it is. So you build 41% more solar, and you're good to go. If solar is less than 60% the price of gas, game over. Overbuild. You're done. Seasonal storage solved. So solar and a battery with a backup battery added has to be less than 60% the cost of a natural gas plant. And then it's done. Over. Game over. Yeah. So I love that Elon's basically tweeting, pro solar shit. Because he's just like
Yeah.
all the same people who just go and bash the shit out of solar because they're conservatives and they think that solar is like liberal hippie bullshit. And the people who do this all day and they're like, nuclear is real man's energy. Like all those people, like Elon Musk just rugs them, because like those guys can't go against Musk. And Musk is like, look, honestly, to become a Kardashev type 1 civilization, we are going to need solar. It's just a mathematical fact. He's right.
Yeah, welcome to the solar age,
Welcome to solar age. I mean, like, we've got a big fusion ball right there. Fusion reaction going right there.
Exactly.
Just catch the energy.
Okay, so 60% solar, 15%
Nuclear.
nuclear. What else?
Let's say
25% left.
25% left. Let's say 15% wind. And then you have 10%, and then you got 5% hydro and 5% geothermal.
Right. Yeah,
That's
that
it.
makes sense.
Done. Maybe you have like 1 or 2% gas in there for just backup. But that's it. We decarbonized, and now we have abundant energy. And of course, eventually, as we use more and more and more and more energy, we will start running out of land for solar and wind. And then and then that's when nuclear really shines, is when land becomes limited. But the day when that happens, we could increase our energy by like many times over and not run out of the land that we just now use for like ethanol or some useless shit.
Well, Noah, this was a fantastic 2 hours. We've settled the nuclear question. We've established the anthropic fallacy. We've explained the Weeb economy. And most importantly, you really have done these things and also read from translations of Xi in a Texan accent.
That was really the key there.
So for all that, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
That was my interview with Noah Smith. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, then the number one way to help us out is to let a friend know, either in person or online. There's someone out there who really trusts your recommendation, and not only are you helping us, but you're helping them find something interesting and informative. You can also help us out by giving us a free subscription on wherever you're listening, subscribing to get paid articles on the Substack, as well as leaving a 5-star review. Also, feel free to suggest future guests. I read all of the comments, and many of our guests are indeed from the comments. As I said up top, you can also, if you're in the DC area, come to the From the New World dinner that we'll have this Saturday, October 12th. And you'll have the link and the location in the description below. And, of course, if you're subscribed, then you'll get a great episode next Monday. See you then.